Hi, it's me, Jenny Smith. One of the surprising findings from my survey of seminary teachers is how confident seminary teachers are that they can recognize when a student is misusing a cell phone. Let me tell you a little story quickly. Now, when I was preparing for my master's project, I invited a group of 5 women over to talk about my prospectus. 3 of them are professional teachers with multiple degrees. 2 were current seminary teachers. All of them were experts in their field. We began talking about the subject, which was cell phone misuse in the classroom, and our chat lasted about an hour and a half. 45 minutes or so into the meeting, which was literally on handling and preventing unwanted cell phone use in the classroom, one woman, the seminary teacher, started texting. Another started using her phone like this. Here, I'll show you. Another professional educator propped up her tablet and started using that. Now, how interesting that there we were in a group talking about the problem of students misusing cell phones with a group of professionals all in basic agreement, while 3 of the 5 individuals had pulled out and were using their devices during our conversation. Now, after a few minutes, I laughingly pointed out the humor of the situation and we talked about it. The fold-out tablet sister was using her iPad to look up my prospectus so she could scan it and follow along. She hadn't had time to read it ahead of time. Now, finger flipper sister had already read the prospectus and she had it up on her phone, but she was also receiving text from her sister that she was dismissing because they were interfering with her ability to read her screen. The seminary teacher who was texting is a realtor, and she was trying to make a sale right there as we were talking. I thought then, and have thought several times since, what a microcosm of cell phone use was presented in that little prospectus discussion. We had a work emergency. Someone was looking suspicious but was actually paying attention, and another was using a device totally focused, but I couldn't see what was happening. Now, I wasn't upset or disturbed by this use because during my time teaching seminary and young women, I've learned that I cannot tell from finger movements if someone is using a cell phone for unwanted use. I must be behind them or where I can actually see the screen. And even then, a glance is not enough to determine whether repeated misuse is occurring. It is not a lie that when I taught seminary, I never once caught a student misusing a cell phone. Not once. All of the times that I called students out verbally in class, I was out of line and I disrupted the flow of a lesson for no reason. My experience with the prospectus discussion group also brought up another important point. We are inclined to think that we aren't distracted by cell phones, but everybody else is. In my recent survey of seminary teachers, only 1 person of 73 has responded that their cell phone distracts them during class. 1. But virtually all of you think that cell phones cause some level of distraction to students. Now, this actually matches my own earlier research. When I did a cell phone survey in my seminary class in partnership with Russell Simon back in 2013, I knew who my 2 naughty students were. While both of my naughty students admitted to rare misuse during the survey, both said there was extreme misuse by the other person. I've learned that it's always best to presume compliance with rules and not act to correct misuse until I am 100% certain a violation has occurred. 100%. I didn't have a co-teacher or a circulating person to help me monitor device screens when I taught seminary. But for the most part, I worked to keep students active enough that their hands were too busy to misbehave, or if they did, they didn't have opportunity to do it for very long. I hope that if you allow cell phones, you are assuming compliance with the rules until proven otherwise. Presume people innocent, right? Your students are the cream of the crop. Be confident in their goodness and in your ability to keep and hold their attention, especially when you stop talking and incorporate more active learning into your lessons. You really can have a good time learning the gospel and give students chances to feel the Spirit in your gospel classroom, I promise. Now, let's talk for a minute about using cell phones as an active learning tool during class. There are 2 main ways. We're going to talk about using the built-in tools to encourage desired behavior, and then also using apps. All right, so using the built-in tools to encourage desired behaviors during class, all right? Most cell phones have a camera. Encourage students to take photos of the notes or the projects that they're doing in class. Can they use voice to text to record information during class? Can they type and text notes on their device? Can they text a friend about what they've learned? Do a little missionary work in class? How about search and show, right? Do an activity during class where someone finds a meme or an image and shares it with a neighbor. Can they search LDS tools for an answer to a peer's question? Can they Google right there in class and analyze the source's reliability? Now, all of these activities can be timed or untimed. You can do lots and lots of different things with just the tools that are available on a cell phone that doesn't even have Gospel Library on it. But if your cell phones do have Gospel Library app on it, you can play a lot of games with your paper, with your students who use paper. Can you have a game where you have a doctrinal mastery race, where students race to see if they can get to a scripture faster on a cell phone or faster on a paper device? How about when they're looking for the answer to a question, which is faster? You might even do just a friendly competition, Apple versus Android, right? Or, like I said, digital versus paper. What kind of competitions can you, or little games can you develop that use just the tools that you have in your classroom to provide a little variety during your lesson? One of the things that I like to do when I'm teaching a student how to use paper or digital scriptures is that both of them are tools that have positive and negatives. One of the examples I use is, look, sometimes your project requires a screwdriver. Sometimes it requires a power drill. So when might you want to use paper over your digital scriptures? When is it better to use something that's got all the information, and when is it better to use something that maybe has a little bit less information in it? Now, what about apps? Okay, there's a lot of apps that you can use when teaching to help specifically. I'm only going to talk about a few of them because the church's firewall is ridiculous and is frequently blocking sites that are useful, like Kahoot, which is absurd, but and YouTube, which frankly both of those are useful and important tools for gospel learning. But other apps that you need are, of course, the Gospel Library. If you feel uncomfortable teaching or sharing or demonstrating how to use the Gospel Library app, or even if you think you're pretty good at it, I encourage you to watch my Become a Gospel Library Ninja in 30 minutes or less video. You're going to learn tricks that you never thought about for using Gospel Library in teaching, I guarantee it. You can also use Quizzes, which is an interactive learning app for students. You can share videos. You can use the Pocket Points app, which is an app that offers students points for when they're using their cell phones correctly or when they keep them put away during class. You can even have students use their Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat apps to share something spiritual on social media. Another thing you can do to incorporate more active learning and less lecture into your lessons is by using games, object lessons, and also videos, which we've mentioned. Find ways to teach that keep students active. Some teachers think that active learning is too fun for real learning to occur. This is patently untrue. Using more active learning to help students engage is neuroscience. Students need and crave novelty to learn. Unfortunately, the church's manuals don't allow for very much, if any, active learning. One of the main reasons for this is that the manual is focused on the release time seminary experience, which happens during the daytime. It's not 6 a.m., and so no one is particularly sleep deprived, which means that lecture is easier to deliver. A release time teacher has professional teacher training, and he or she already knows how to adapt lessons to include more active learning. Plus, a release time teacher's classes are generally very large, which automatically eliminates many of the very best learning activities that those who are teaching stake seminary can use. What's more, each lesson segment follows a prescribed 4-step progression of questions. All that varies is the material and how far down the 4-step pattern the segment proceeds. These lesson manuals just aren't aimed at the early morning teacher. It's not your fault that the lessons are boring, they just are. Now this means that it's going to take a little more work for you to find active learning experiences to share with your students, but you can do it. There are more ideas than ever before for the stake seminary or unit gospel teacher. Google for object lessons. You can get books used on Amazon that are full of LDS object lessons. I have several in my library. Search the LDS Seminary Teacher Facebook group for more ideas on active learning. These are some of the best teachers in the church sharing their ideas. You'll find tons of games like the ever-popular Scripture Man. There are simple teaching methods like the one I named Hey There Delilah, where students toss a stuffed animal or another item, it can even be a wadded up paper ball, to each other to determine who goes next in reading order or who answers the next question. Do a role play, bring in some wacky wigs or some weird clothes. I have found this is the easiest and most fun way to engage students and reinforce the scripture stories, or to make a little reading exercise seem a little more exciting. Look, it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. It doesn't need to be techie. It just needs to be interesting. Focus on creating lessons so engaging that youth forget their cell phones aren't in their hands. Now, you learned in my to ban or not to ban videos that the students say one of the most effective ways for managing a cell phone is to remove the cell phone from that student. That almost always has a negative connotation. Is there a way to make cell phone removal positive? Well, it turns out there is, and it's backed up by several teachers' experiences and some quasi-research that I didn't have when I did that first video, but I have now, and so I'm going to share it with you. I'm calling this LDS variation the spirit world. The spirit world is a variation of cell phone jail. Cell phone jail being where a student loses cell phone privileges and the device goes into cell phone jail until the end of the class period, where it must be bailed out by either the student or a parent, depending on your policy. But with spirit world, students voluntarily put their phones in a box or other container labeled the spirit world at the beginning of class with some unique points. Participation in spirit world is totally voluntary, unlike real life, right? Participation is totally voluntary. Devices must be deposited before the class begins. And those who leave a phone in the spirit world throughout class are provided a reward. They might get extra credit. They might get food. They might get a special breakfast party with the bishop or the missionaries. They might get a blanket to keep them warm during those early morning classes. They might get an increase in grade. You might bring in the couches from the hallway and let them sit on a couch to listen to seminary. That was a huge thing in my seminary class. If they could sit in a comfortable chair, big deal, right? Drag in some of the cushy chairs from the bishop's office and use those as a reward for students who are able to keep their phones in spirit world for X number of days. You might also, a student who keeps their phone in the spirit world for a while might also receive a reduction in tardies or absences. There's lots and lots of different ways to make it fun for students to put their phones away so that you can help them focus on the lesson material a little more effectively. This is a positive way that reduces misuse, especially if you don't feel that you're able to incorporate electronic scriptures into your classroom effectively for whatever reason. And like I said, if you don't feel comfortable with the Gospel Library app, go see my Gospel Library Ninja in 30 minutes or less video. But you might also be doing a particular set of activities during which a device will not be used. And this is a way to encourage students to put their phones away without being negative. So you might have presumed, and you would be correct, that I have some recommendations about cell phone use based on my research through this study. So here's what I could say to you as friend to friend. If you were to sit down and ask me about what you should be doing with cell phones, this is what I'd say to you. So the first thing advice I would give to you is that you need to stop taking student technology use violations as personal affronts. You need to Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. Let's take our emotions out of our reactions to student cell phone misuse. Stop being angry that they're disrespecting us and just deal with the problem. Now, whether or not you decide to ban cell phones outright, recognize there will be exceptions and provide a method for those exceptions to be considered. You should always presume compliance. Assume that the students are doing their best first. Don't assume that they're misbehaving. Think back to my story about the prospectus. Of the 3 women who were using cell phones, 2 were using them for class purposes and 1 had a work emergency. Now, You should focus on students who are abiding by the policy. Make a big deal about students who are following the rules. You should promote structured use of cell phones. Put your phone up, put the phone down. We're using it during this discussion, but we're not using it during that one. And then try to use less lecture. Stop talking so dadgum much. Find ways to use active learning in your lessons. I am a big proponent of active learning, and there are more ways to do that than ever now. So try to find ways to let students do more of the talking during class. Focus on creating lessons so engaging that youth forget that their cell phones aren't even in their hands. I think you should show more videos. That's shown by research to help students control their cell phone use. And then you should go to your stake leaders and request smaller classes. Smaller classes, we're talking about fewer than 20, were shown to help students engage better with the teacher and the material, which lessened the likelihood of being distracted by cell phones. And that's a 2015 study by Berry and Westphal. So yes, if your class is in size greater than 20, please go to your leaders and request a smaller class. All right, now here's the money question. This is the one you really want to ask me, right? Do I recommend banning or allowing cell phones in the LDS classroom? Well, I do not recommend an outright ban of cell phones in the classroom. While I'm a proponent of having a cell phone policy with consequences, positive and some negative, I do not recommend a total ban in a LDS classroom. And the main reason is this: an outright ban is the only method that will never teach proper use. You cannot teach a student how to use a cell phone properly without a student holding a cell phone. I believe, like Schneider, that we should work on managing the problem rather than seeking to eliminate it. Electronic scriptures just aren't going away. Students are going to need them on their missions. Church headquarters is releasing more and more material in digital format only. For me, the benefits of electronic devices outweigh the negatives. A student can have a lifetime of gospel study and notes in the palm of his hand, available at all times. And I believe that if you have a fair policy with a positive tone, you can develop a rapport with students and change their behavior, which is what we're about as gospel teachers. Remember, like you keep hearing me say, cognitive learning isn't the emphasis in the LDS classroom. Effective learning or changing behavior is. And one of the ways we can do that is by having a fair, positive cell phone policy. Just to reiterate, an outright ban is the only method that will never teach students proper cell phone use. We can either spend the next 40 years complaining that these kids don't know how to use cell phones responsibly and respectfully, or we can teach them to use cell phones responsibly and respectfully. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I do believe that the value of the cell phone as a tool makes that effort worth it. Thank you for listening to these videos. I really appreciate your input and comments below, especially your questions. This is all for my master's capstone, so please don't forget to take my instructional questionnaire, my post-instruction survey at the end of this so that I can wrap up my capstone. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to these videos. I really appreciate your input and comments below, especially your questions. This is all for my master's capstone, so please don't forget to take my instructional questionnaire, my post-instruction survey at the end of this so that I can wrap up my capstone. Thanks so much.